Unlike Donald Trump, who had $400 million served to him on a silver platter and still managed to file for bankruptcy 6 times. He talks about being a good businessman. Come on. I grew up in a middle-class neighborhood with a working mother who kept a strict budget.
With just 10 days until Election Day, Vice President Harris is poking holes in Donald Trump's businessman persona. It's part of her closing argument on the economy. Harris is promising to fight for the middle class. As for Donald Trump, well, top economists say his policies will hurt hardworking families. Harris made that case in a conversation with Mark Cuban just this week.
I've known Donald Trump 25 years. He used to be okay on trade policy, but over the last 25 years, he's just lost it.
I don't think he pays attention to the details, and you can't be president of the United States
Unless you pay attention to the details.
Yeah, that's fine if he wants to, just give speeches in random places for random reasons. But to talk about such significant policy like tariffs, much less foreign policy, he is applying a machete when a scalpel is what's necessary.
Whole conversation was a very eloquent drag. Billionaire entrepreneur Mark Cuban joins us now. He's the co-founder of the public benefit corporation, Cost Plus Drugs.
Mark, it is good to see you again. It's been a while. Welcome to the table, my friend. I appreciate you being here. So to continue on with your conversation with the vice president, in an open letter this week on Wednesday, 23 Nobel Prize winning economists noted, quote, Trump's policies, including high tariffs, even on goods from our friends and allies, regressive tax cuts for corporations and individuals, will lead to higher prices, larger deficits, and greater inequality. Among the most important determinants of economic success are the rule of law and economic and political certainty, and Trump threatens all of these. That is part of the detail that goes into being president and understanding the connective tissue between a policy and the outcome. Talk to us a little bit about what you're finding as Americans out there, and I've heard you speaking rather eloquently on this point. Americans still feel a little bit of drag in this economy. And in pockets and sectors, it hasn't quite caught up. What do you think the closing argument should be that they need to hear from Kamala about that part of their narrative?
So a couple things. One, not everybody experiences the economy equally. A lot of people are doing really well right now. We see that in the numbers, but some people are still struggling. And so from the vice president's perspective, you have to look at the details. I'll simplify what they were saying about taxes. If Trump gets elected and puts on a 60% tariff on imported Chinese goods, he's going to screw up their Christmas. There's a huge percentage of Christmas presents that we all buy that are imported from China. If now all of a sudden there's 60% more, you're not buying the same number or quality of gifts for your children, your friends, your family, etc. But it gets worse. What about all the retailers that you buy from, the local dress shop, the local sporting goods store, etc.? They're going to struggle as well. And when they close, communities suffer. And so that's bad. Number two, and I think it's a big part of our closing argument, is how she's dealing with the cost of health care. When people ask, you hear the normal complaint, well, prices went up 20%. They did. But how do you offset that? Kamala Harris has talked very specifically about pharmacy benefit managers and the pharmacy middlemen and getting them out of the way and reducing their impact, because effectively they set prices. And on top of that, she's talked about introducing transparency. I know from my experiences with costplusdrugs.com, in doing those two things, households are going to experience a 20, 30% or more cost in their pharmaceutical costs, and potentially even more in their healthcare costs. So those are two big things. And then the third big issue from a business perspective, that's a little bit of field from what we were talking about, but still very important, is deportation. When you have mass deportations, the only way you're going to get there is walking up to the manager at a restaurant, asking for their I-9s, which is the form you fill out to determine the immigration status of your employees, asking for a list of all your employees, wanting to know their social security number, their phone numbers, and where they live, and then going to their homes and, knocking on their door and walking through the house to see who's there. We're setting up checkpoints in front of the restaurant to see, who's legal and who's not. That's not the United States of America, but that's what we're looking at. And we can talk about the social impacts, but from a business impact, it's far worse than what those professors said.
It definitely doesn't make people want to walk into a restaurant. If you ask any restaurant owner across the country, which the majority of them are small business owners, they will say that they are struggling right now to even find people to work all the shifts, okay, across the country. So the hospitality industry is also still struggling. So
yeah, and Simone, you can even take it one step further. When you talk, there's 33 million businesses in this country. 99% of them are small. And of those, 99% are what they call pass-through companies, subchapter S, LLCs, sole proprietorships, and 99% of the people who own them make $400,000 or less. And what that means is for almost every single business in this country, if you make $400,000 or less, your taxes are either going to be the same, or for 100 million plus people, your taxes are going down. So Kamala Harris is far better for business, and that's the message I keep on sending as I go around the country.
Mark, I'm so glad you talk about deportation in the context of business, because so often what you hear from folks is, well, he's not going to really do that. He's a businessman. He understands how this all works. Believe him when he tells you that he's going to deport all these folks. Sure. Let me ask you, too, about some other big news we had just at the end of this week. The Washington Post choosing not to endorse. This is from their own reporting. Post editorial page staff members had drafted an endorsement of Vice President Harris that had yet to be published. Two sources briefed on the sequence of events told the Post the decision not to publish the Harris endorsement was made by the Post owner, billionaire Amazon founder Jeff Bezos. That is according to sources. I got a note. NBC News has not independently verified that account. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, look, the newspaper business is a tough business. You saw it with the LA Times. You see it now even with one of the wealthiest men in the world, Jeff Bezos, and they're putting finances ahead of discipline and history. It's unfortunate, but I don't think it's the end of it. I think we're going to see more and more of it.
Mark, I read this as even I think that Jeff Bezos, and I would also argue the owner of the LA Times, their non-endorsement or their decision to weigh in on top of their editorial boards to say we're not going to say something is more about the potential retribution that could come if Donald Trump wins this election. And to me, that says if these very powerful people are concerned about Donald Trump's retribution, if they are unwilling to, stand up to him, take the chance to stand up to him for what he would do, what does that mean for regular folks across the country? Like, how can we expect people who don't have the means to be willing to do so? It's chilling for that reason.
Yeah, you're not wrong, Simone. I mean, look, it's terrifying. He talks about it daily. Listen what he says, right? Hear what he has to say. There's a reason why he is saying it over and over and over again. He talks about the enemy within. He's starting to name names of examples of people he finds to be enemies. It's not a question of if, it's a question of how. And that's all the more reason we need to get Kamala Harris in office.
So on that note, Mark, as a continuing example of Simone's point about the chilling effect that Donald Trump is having on not just our nation's politics, but on our business and business leaders, you have the New York Times headlines from Tuesday noting Jamie Dimon privately supports Kamala Harris. He just won't say so. Headline again, Bill Gates privately says he has backed Harris with $50 million donation. What does that say to you? I mean, you've always been, and I've been a big admirer of yours for a long time, because you're a guy who's just like calls the balls and strikes. You're out on the front lines. You're not hiding in a corner, sort of, taking your cards and putting them in your pocket and not showing people. Talk about why this time in our history, particularly given the threat that ostensibly everyone sees in front of them, more and more individuals in positions of power and leadership shirk from that opportunity to draw that bright line saying, this is who we are, this far and no further. I mean, if you're gonna make a $50 million donation, just say, hey, baby, I'm giving her $50 million because she's gonna keep my businesses open. She's gonna be good for our economy, and she's not going to lock anybody up.
Right. So, you guys talked a little bit earlier about the formerly shy Trump supporters, how you didn't really hear from them. And when you didn't hear from them, it made sense to feel comfortable to speak up about Joe Biden or whoever. Right. Now, those Trump supporters have been emboldened by Elon Musk on Twitter. I mean, everybody has something to say if you're a Trump supporter. And if you go onto Twitter, they're just going to torch you if you said anything positive. And I think because Twitter is a foundational source of information for media, I think that creates fear for the Jamie Dimons of the world, the Bill Gates of the world. Because look, there's going to be millions of people on Twitter. I see it every day whenever I say anything positive, and I don't mind the trolls. That's just part of the deal. They don't bother me. But for a lot of people who have ongoing businesses, if all of a sudden the trolls on Twitter, who knows how many, are starting to tear apart your company, tear apart you personally, that's a lot. And it's far more difficult for a lot of people to deal with that. And it goes to the heart of the polls and everything else. You talked about, women not letting their husbands know. I have people come up to me every day saying, thank you so much for speaking out. I can't do it. I really appreciate it. But, I'm afraid of, what my family or friends or others might feel. And it's now the Trump voter who is loud and denigrates people online and has no problem, creating a hard time for anybody.
Mark, you are clearly being deployed by the campaign to persuade those voters that are left to persuade when you talk to them, whether it is in person, on podcasts. What are you finding to be the most persuasive closing argument?
Most recently, deportation, because people, didn't want to believe that he would do something like that. And now he's talking more and more about it. When he talks about the enemy within, when he has signs behind him saying mass deport, when Stephen Miller is being more emboldened to speak out, it's starting to resonate with people. And I'm trying, like we talked earlier, I'm trying to convert that into business terms, into cultural terms, into community terms. I asked an immigration lawyer, I was like, look, tell me, are there examples of grandparents who have been here 20, 30 years that are still undocumented? Why are they still undocumented? Well, because they were afraid then. Now they're terrified. She's getting people coming up to her as an attorney asking, what should they do? They're afraid they're going to be sent home, even though they may have American kids, American grandkids. It doesn't matter. People are terrified. Business people, like Simone, you talked about restaurants. Business people are terrified as well that, if the people they hire are going to be legal, but if their parents, their grandparents, their aunts, their uncles, their nieces, their nephews are not documented, are they going to be able to go to work? Are they going to have to move? How are they going to deal with that? That's just terrifying people. And I've now been in Pittsburgh and from Pittsburgh, I've talked to some folks. I got an email actually from somebody who's a Polish American saying the Polish community is now gaining behind Vice President Harris because of support for Ukraine. Because if Ukraine is taken over by Russia, Poland is next, and they know, and they have relatives there, and they're starting to really be afraid that, if that happens, things are going to change for their families.
To that last point about deportation, I just have one point to make. So when Donald Trump starts rounding up everybody and deporting them, I'm hoping MAGA has their 18-year-old son ready to go, go to those fields and cut those lawns, because somebody's got to do it.
Yeah, because Donald Trump's going to send his kid too.
Yeah, exactly.
Mark, I've been screaming my head off about this, but I know it sounds different coming from you. Mark Cuban, thank you so much for joining The Weekend.
Thanks.
So joining me now, we have Richard Hassan, professor of law and political science at UCLA Law School, also an MSNBC election analyst. Thanks for joining me, Rick. So give me a sense of the risks. What are they for Elon Musk and his super PAC if he continues with his sweepstakes? Does it violate federal election law, or does it come right up to the line?
I think there's a very good argument that it does violate federal election law, which says that you can't pay people to register to vote or to vote. And if you look in the Department of Justice's own election crimes manual, it describes lotteries as the kind of thing that you're not allowed to do, which is why the warning letter went out. What we're seeing now, just in the last day or so, from the Musk PAC is a switch to say, if you get the $1 million, you're being hired as our spokesperson. Paying someone to be a spokesperson, that would not violate federal law. And so they're trying to recast what they're doing, but it's a little odd because they're making the offer of employment after they've given away the lottery winnings. But I think after the election, it's possible that he could face some criminal liability. There's a charge of up to 5 years in jail and up to $10,000 fine for each violation. I think jail time is probably unlikely in this circumstance, but if this doesn't get deterred, then I think we'll see a lot more of this kind of activity in future elections.
God, I wonder if he would care about a $10,000 fine for each incursion, right? But that said, we have the election 10 days away. Kamala Harris has asked this week about her plan if Trump repeats what he did in 2020, which is prematurely and or falsely declare victory before all the votes are counted. So here's what she said.
I'm very much grounded in the present in terms of the task at hand, and we will deal with election night and the days after as they come, and we have the resources and the expertise and the focus on that as well.
So you have teams ready to go? Is that what you're saying? Are you thinking about that as a possibility?
Of course. This is a person, Donald Trump, who tried to undo a free and fair election, who still denies the will of the people.
So, Rick, your article in Slate this week, which feels kind of like a public service announcement, it warns about a Trump victory speech and how a blue shift or red mirage could result in confusion, in conspiracies, and potentially in political violence. What should we be prepared for?
Well, what we saw in 2020 was that votes from people who voted in person were reported first, and votes from people who voted by mail were reported later. And because more Democrats were voting by mail, we saw this so-called blue shift, where Trump appeared to have a lead, and then it later changed days later. And Trump declared victory in the middle of that. So we could see that again. We don't know what the election results are going to look like, but that's definitely possible. And it's kind of a dangerous time because then there's all this attention with people wondering, why have the vote totals changed? Why does it look like a Trump lead changing to a Harris lead or something like that? And so the message really from the media should be that the race is too early to call, that people need to have patience. They need to wait. It wasn't until Saturday after Election Day in 2020 when we knew who was going to win the election. And it could be maybe Thursday or Friday. This time around, we have a little bit less vote by mail, but there could be a period of uncertainty if it is as close as the polls suggest that it could be.
Yeah, indeed. So we have more than 38 million early votes now have already been cast in this election. How could the different processing and all the vote counting laws in different states complicate the numbers coming in on Election Day, and in fact, any of the counting days after?
Well, so two things are different. First, fewer people are going to vote by mail this time. A lot of people voted by mail last time because of the pandemic. And also, Trump was discouraging early voting last time. He's encouraging it this time. So while we see the numbers going up, it's very hard to look at those numbers and figure out if it really means anything in terms of who's got any kind of benefit. But I think the key point is to be patient. All the votes will be in, but they take time to be processed, and not every state moves quickly. And especially Pennsylvania, Wisconsin have special rules that delay the processing of their mail-in ballots. And so those are two crucial states. And those are states where it's very unlikely, if the race is close, that we're going to be able to know who the winner is going to be by, say, the time we wake up on the day after Election Day.
Yeah, I think we're going to be having a nail-biting few days for sure. All right, Rick Hasen, thank you so much for weighing in. Appreciate that.
What makes you qualified to have a discussion, to be a voice where men are talking about, it's called Man Enough. What makes you qualified to be a part of that conversation and have a voice?
The same thing that makes you the most qualified to have a conversation about whiteness. That you as a black man understand whiteness far more than I understand it, or Justin can understand it.
What a great answer.
And it's not to say that it's your labor or your work, but you actually can teach us way more about it because you have had to deal with it every single minute. When you're the oppressed group, you know everything about the oppressor. You know things that they don't even know about themselves.
What she said. 10 days out, we're hearing that inexplicably, so many male voters are still wavering between the choice of a convicted felon and a qualified woman who also happens to be the current vice president of the United States. So let's talk about it. Joining me now is that brilliant woman that you just saw, Liz Plank, MSNBC columnist and the author of For the Love of Men. Liz, you've been doing the hard work. You've been traveling across our country, talking to men about their fascination with fascism and masculinity in general. What are they telling you?
Such a good question. Such a good segment. Thank you, Katie. Yeah, I've been traveling across swing states. I'm pretty much on the road until the election, talking to male voters. And one thing that's really clear is that their shift to the right is not because they're uncomfortable with women's place in society. It's actually because they're uncomfortable with their own. A lot of men, right, we've changed the definition of what it means to be a woman. It's fundamentally changed in the best way possible. But a lot of men are lost about what it means to be a man in that structure, right, in that society. And you have people like Donald Trump who are exploiting those confusions and those fears. And those are really fears that are rooted in real things. I mean, if you just look at the data, I mean, the average male wage is the same now than it was in 1970. But the reason for that and the policies that continue that kind of disparity are the policies that Trump basically advances, right? Donald Trump is interested in giving tax cuts to his friends. Elon Musk made the most money than any other person on earth while Trump was president. And so the economic agenda, we need to be very clear here that Donald Trump is actually failing the men that he claims to be championing.
So, Liz, last night, Vice President Harris had a few words for the men at that rally. Take a quick listen.
Men across America do not want to see their daughters and wives and sisters and mothers put at risk because their rights have been taken. I see the men here, and I thank you. The men of America don't want this.
I mean, Liz, it doesn't have to be the bro culture that we see of the Tucker Carlson, Donald Trump type of mantras. I think it's somebody like Tim Walz. He's successfully threaded the needle of turning the idea of masculinity on its head by showing a deep empathy for women's issues, but at the still time being the coach, the dad, the hunter, the military veteran.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. Tim Walz uses his masculinity for good, and Donald Trump exploits it for his own gain. And can we talk about masculinity, right? Like, Trump is putting on a performance of masculinity because he's not actually masculine. I mean, this is a guy who spends more time with his makeup artist than with his own advisors. But even setting aside that he probably wears more makeup than Kamala Harris, masculine men aren't afraid of women. They're not afraid to debate women. Masculine men don't have meltdowns on stage because a woman that they didn't like asked them a question that they didn't like. Masculine men aren't manipulated by people who give them compliments. I mean, at this point, Donald Trump is Putin's side check, to put it very bluntly and very simply. And you know what? Masculine men actually protect women. They don't enact abortion bans that endanger women. And so even based on Donald Trump's own definition of masculinity, and if you want hyper-masculinity of being a protector of women, Donald Trump is failing at his own definition of it. And this sort of, masculinity Eras tour that he's on, where he's talking about a dead golfer's manhood, where he's blowing kisses to Hulk Hogan. To your point, I mean, this is a performance because actually Trump is not a very masculine man, according to his own definition of it.
So, Liz, our friend Anand Giridharadas wrote a piece for The Ink that echoes your sentiments about men and fascism. He actually referenced you in the piece. He says John Kelly, Trump's former chief of staff, warned in the starkest terms that Trump is a fascist with a real authoritarian vision and confirmed the murmurs about Trump being jealous not to have the kind of generals that Hitler did. The distressing thing is that a majority of American men are looking at all of this and saying, yeah, let's do that. We are dude-broing our way into democratic death. A lot of what a lot of men are going through right now is simply the inner experience of the old line. When you're accustomed to privilege, equality feels like oppression. I mean, Liz, you're talking to these men. Is that what is going on?
You have basically Donald Trump and J.D. Vance appealing to men's worst version of themselves, right? The fascists, the dominating, okay, we're just going to burn it all to the ground because I am not getting what I want and again, some of this dissatisfaction that men are feeling is really rooted in a real suffering, right? And it's not unique to men, but it's definitely affecting men's ability to be providers, which is their sort of core identity as men. And then you have, again, the other side, Tim Walz and Kamala Harris, who are offering a very different vision. And I think that this election is showing us that we are at a crossroads. We do need a positive new vision of what men can be and what men can, and men need to be able to see that. And they have the ability to make this choice in this election. I think that men can have a very central, very important role in, again, protecting women, protecting children from predators, from people who do not have our best interest at heart. And so I think that we need to be clear that the most masculine thing that a man can do is actually vote for a woman.
And protecting from predators like Donald Trump. Liz Plank, thanks so much. I invite everybody who's tuning in, go check out Liz's Substacks. They are amazing.
Back with me now, Alexi McCammon and Cristina Simpson Ramirez. All right, Cristina, you first here. What kind of effect do words like that have on immigrants living in the U.S. or anyone who thinks of America positively or as a welcoming country?
I mean, it's absolutely absurd and racist. I mean, Donald Trump has blamed immigrants during his campaign and since he sought political office for every single thing from housing to crime to lost pets. And he does this because he has no real plans to address what Americans care about. We can build an immigration system that protects American-born workers and immigrant workers, but he has no self-interest in actually pushing forward those policies. Look, scapegoating immigrants and communities of color, it's tired, it's old, but it's as tired and old as the Ku Klux Klan in this country, and he's using that same old playbook to divide our country, and I will say make many, many people who are not even undocumented fearful in our communities and open to assaults and hate crimes.
Alexi, I want to get to a hot button issue here because the Washington Post announced it will not make an endorsement in the presidential race this year for the first time since 1976. It will not endorse in future ones either. So reporters from the paper published an article saying an endorsement for Harris had been written, but the paper's owner, Amazon founder Jeff Bezos, made the decision to stop the endorsement. We are also learning that Trump met with leaders from Bezos's aerospace company Blue Origin in Texas yesterday. You used to be an opinions editor for the Post. What do you make of this and what motivated it?
Yeah, it's a crazy story. Media companies need better PR teams, I think, first and foremost. Secondly, I have great respect for the Washington Post opinions department, the editorial board. David Shipley runs the department and is so wonderful and lovely. I think this story really should call into question whether or not Jeff Bezos should own the Washington Post, whether or not he is even up for the job, whether or not he respects the job of journalists to the degree that is necessary in these trying times, whether he is able to manage the Washington Post and not view it as a conflict of interest with other entities that he owns or has stake in. And as you mentioned, when we see photos and learn that Donald Trump is meeting with executives from Blue Origin, that certainly raises eyebrows as to whether or not Jeff Bezos was motivated not to endorse this time around or not to allow the opinion department to do what it's done for decades in fear of hurting Donald Trump's feelings and losing out on some sort of business deal in the future, which, by the way, it's all hypothetical worries. Donald Trump hasn't been elected. Nothing is happening. It's a bizarre decision. But again, I think it screams the fact, when you look at the LA Times, too, that maybe billionaires shouldn't be the ones owning these newspapers.
A lot of questions about that, that's for sure. Moving to you, Cristina. Harris said that her team is prepared for Trump to prematurely declare victory. And you know Trump will challenge the results if he loses. What are your concerns about election night and thereafter?
Look, I think organizations like ours and many across the country and election officials are preparing and also afraid of political violence. We know that that is not just something that Trump he's proven that he's willing to use political violence to try and hold office. They are going to declare victory. And I think our job is to make sure that your viewers, people in our organizations that follow us, that they know that we're going to have to wait until there are real election results, that no one should believe what comes out of the Donald Trump campaign, and that we need to fight and make sure that all the votes are counted appropriately and accordingly by law, and that ultimately, if there are challenges, they can go through the courts, and that the courts will make those final decisions, not Donald Trump.
Quickly to you, Alexi, can Democrats capitalize this? Can they remind viewers of what happened in 2020?
Oh, yeah. I mean, Harris is set to give a big speech, her closing remarks, so to speak, this week at the Ellipse, which is, of course, the site where Donald Trump told his supporters to march on down to the Capitol because it would be wild and he would meet them down there to riot and rally. And obviously he didn't follow them, but it is a stark reminder of, you know, two different leaders in the same place and how they can use their supporters to their advantage or, you know, to incite political violence.
Christina, Alexia, I love talking with both of you, so come see me again. Thank you.
Just 10 days left until Election Day. It's full steam ahead on the campaign trail for Vice President Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. And while more than 36 million Americans have already cast their votes, today marks the first day of early voting in California, New York, New Jersey, and Michigan. And the Great Lakes state is where we find both candidates today, with Trump set to speak at a rally at any moment. This evening, though, the vice president will be joined in Kalamazoo by former First Lady Michelle Obama. It comes after a busy Friday where Trump left rally-goers in Michigan waiting for more than 3 hours while he taped a podcast with Joe Rogan. As Vice President Harris held her largest campaign event to date with a crowd of 30,000 in Houston, Texas, featuring the Queen Bee herself, Beyonce. Joining me now, Tara Setmayer, former GOP comms director and co-founder and CEO of the amazing Seneca Project, and former Florida Congressman David Jolly, who is an MSNBC political analyst. Two of my favorites joining me and getting us started today. Let's start with that Harris rally in Houston last night. David, you know, it was a huge emphasis on reproductive rights and the idea of individual freedoms. It was an emotional rally with a lot of the speakers talking about direct impacts on their lives. But importantly, the message that if Donald Trump gets elected again, he will go for a national abortion ban. Do you think emotions are going to actually persuade those that may still be on the fence, David?
Look, I think for Vice President Harris, if there's a singular policy issue that's going to turn people out, it's this. We've seen it in every ballot test since the Dobbs decision. I believe 7 out of 7 times when this question or this issue is at the forefront of voters' minds, Democrats outperform by wide margins. And so on the policy issue, you have the natural tee-up of reproductive freedom that merges perfectly with this idea of protecting democracy, because without protecting the fundamentals of democracy, you certainly can't protect reproductive freedom. And so the closing message, I think, on policy issues will be about reproductive freedom. And then on the question of democracy, we'll see, I believe, this Tuesday night when Vice President Harris speaks at the Ellipse, this overarching argument she needs to make, and she is making, about protecting democracy. Katie, I think the most gettable voters down the stretch are soft Republicans who are still undecided. Certainly you need to turn out all the verticals, black women, black men, white labor, white working class voters, suburban women. But the gettable, persuadable voters that remain are soft Republicans who need to be reminded about the danger of Donald Trump and persuaded still to vote for Vice President Harris.
You know, Tara, I was in Austin yesterday. Down the street from me was Donald Trump doing a 3-hour podcast taping with Joe Rogan. Again, I understand David's point, but I think a lot of voters that maybe are still waiting to make a decision, they may be trying to get some substantive policy from Donald Trump. It is lacking. The only platform that man has shared is that America is a garbage can so far. Your thoughts about whether or not him going to something like a podcast with Joe Rogan made sense for somebody like Donald Trump, which, by the way, 3 hours was just the weave that he seems to be skilled at doing.
You know, it's clear that Donald Trump and his campaign made the decision that they're going to go after the broocracy. Like, that has been the vibe of Donald Trump's campaign, and apparently they think it's going to work. You see the way they disparage women. Donald Trump even this morning was tweeting away about how abortion doesn't matter anymore. Women will be fine. You know, they don't care. J.D. Vance said, oh, women don't care about abortion. They care about normal things. I'm sorry, excuse me. Women are voting at a record number in early voting in 3 states that we know of so far. 3 pretty important states like Georgia, Michigan, and now North Carolina. Normal things, I'm sorry, but normal things like our lives, our health care, whether you trust us to make decisions about our bodily autonomy, about our families, about our futures, about our daughters, those are normal things. So Donald Trump going over to a hyper-masculine, bro fest with Joe Rogan is par for the course for him. He thinks that he's going to get more of those voters out to vote for him. They're normally low propensity voters, so good luck with that. But if you look at the contrast between Donald Trump and his approach and where he was yesterday and what Kamala Harris and her campaign is doing, we even just look at, forget the women for a second. You know, we run a women's organization, but we also appreciate our male allies. You look at the men who have stood up next to their wives, next to their sisters and their mothers, who are protecting them and speaking out about the outrageous Trump abortion bans and what this has meant for them, especially in a place like Texas. You look at the Ryan Hamiltons of the world. You look at Amanda's husband. These are men that actually love their wives, not the Joe Rogan type of men that despise women. That juxtaposition, I think, is really important for people to see, which is why we made an ad called Hope about IVF from the dad's perspective. No other organization has done that. Because to David's point, you need to talk to these suburban women and their husbands, because that daddy-daughter relationship is one of the most powerful, most persuadable relationships in politics. And that's why we wanted to focus in on that as part of our closing message, to talk to that constituency as well, because every vote's going to matter.
Let's be clear. It's not the daddy-daughter relationship that Tucker Carlson was talking about. That would happen with Donald Trump, with the daddy coming home. David, though, there was something of the 36 million early votes, 53% were women. But I wanted to point this out. You know, Joe Rogan 2 years ago said that Donald Trump was an existential threat to democracy. And yet, 2 years later, we see him doing the podcast interview with Donald Trump. But something that struck me, David, is the fact that Donald Trump still cannot produce evidence of election fraud from 2020, even though Donald Trump is already preparing to claim when he loses that there was election fraud. And yet Joe Rogan pressed him, and he couldn't get an answer from Donald Trump on that.
That's exactly right. And let me just plant a flag for Girl Dads for Harris, because that is a real thing. That is exactly what you all are talking about. But this issue, and it's really unsettling to see this, particularly down the stretch, hopefully for undecided voters. The notion that Donald Trump couldn't acknowledge to Joe Rogan that he lost the 2020 election, among these persuadable voters, these gettable voters that Vice President Harris is reaching out to. We saw it in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. We saw it at the convention. We'll see it this coming week. She is actually saying, come be a part of our coalition to defend democracy. Katie, I have a hard time understanding why people are still undecided. These soft Republicans who can listen to Mike Pence and John Kelly say, this man is dangerous. Please take our word for it. Our traditional national security Republicans, we're telling you he's dangerous. Don't vote for him. And then we get to hear this week that Donald Trump is still denying the 2020 election, and he will contest this election. If he loses the electoral votes on election night or the days thereafter, this will go to January. Donald Trump will contest this again and put our nation through what we went through 4 years ago. I don't understand why these voters are still undecided. And I believe Vice President Harris's closing message is going to focus on exactly those voters to say, you can't go back. You cannot go back to Donald Trump. I think it's a convincing argument.
And, you know, Tara, something that happened was the Washington Post refusing to do an endorsement. You saw the LA Times refusing to do the same. It's really disheartening to see people sitting on the sidelines in a moment when there truly is an existential threat to democracy. Your thoughts about whether or not the Billionaire Bros Club is actually putting their finger on the scale of this 2024 election?
Oh, without question. It's obvious in a lot of respects, not just this one. I mean, the absolute malpractice and cowardice of the Washington Post and the legacy of that newspaper in this moment right now is really unspeakable. How irresponsible, because these billionaire bros are worried about their bottom lines. As women in particular, we don't have the option to opt out. We don't get that. You know, our lives are at stake. Our democracy is at stake. We don't get that option. But they are going to opt out of this now. It's shameful. And you look at this not only from this perspective, but also the infusion of money. What Elon Musk and Peter Thiel and the crypto bros and all of these guys, I mean, they're even putting, there's this new PAC out that's trying to convince Republican women that Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Donald Trump were on the same side of the abortion issue. $20 million was infused into this super PAC at the last minute, because they know that this is a kryptonite issue for them, trying to compare the two, saying that they were on the same side and that she agreed it should go back to the states. They just did that this weekend as a Hail Mary, because you know that they're desperate and they're worried about women saying we're not going to go back. We're not going to put up with this. No, you're not going to do that. And like you said, in early voting, women are the majority in early votes. This is a lie. They are dishonest. They are degenerates. And they don't care about us. They only care about themselves. And they certainly don't care about women's lives and the fact that women are dying because of Trump's abortion bans, and that even Republican women are uncomfortable with that and are going to vote on that issue because it is about freedom. They are trying to put their thumbs on the scale, but that's why it's so important for organizations like ours and others that we get that truth out there to make sure, because we tell the truth, they don't. They're liars. We tell the truth, and I think women are going to see through that as long as we can keep getting that information out there to them on platforms like these, and we're so appreciative of that, because women are going to save this democracy. That's what we're convinced of. Let's do it, ladies.
I know David Jolly will not disagree with you, Tara Setmayer, and as I say goodbye, I will add this. Women's BS meters, they're bar none the best that exists. So it's good to see you, Tara Setmayer and David Jolly. Thanks for getting me started today. I appreciate it.